So a question we should ask ourselves before we welcome into new technologies into our lives, before we invest in them, before we say, no, okay, I'm good with it, is it going to undercut or erode the fabric of our relational networks? Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a psychological scientist and former university professor. And in this video, I'd like to add to my discussion of tech prudence, or curbing your tech enthusiasm. When should we allow technology into our lives? When should we encourage its spread? In previous video, I suggested 4 questions that we could ask ourselves about any new piece of technology that might help us think through whether we should be enthusiastic about it or maybe take more of a let's look and see kind of attitude. I asked whether it substitutes for a natural process or a natural need of ours. Is it taking advantage of what you might call super stimuli? Does it sort of flood or sort of super activate something in our brains that draws us to it in a sort of unhealthy way maybe? Has it been acquired very quickly in society? Has it been invented in recent years and hasn't sort of earned its place, but is suddenly thrust upon us, as opposed to rolling out incrementally over generations and being fine-tuned? And does it get in the way of our stewardship or our ability to be faithful stewards of God's creation, including caring for each other? But it's been pointed out to me that maybe there's a 5th question that's worth asking. I agree, this is a really good question. In some ways, it's the substitution question, but more focused on our character as social animals. One of the things that's very distinctive about humans is that we are immensely social beings. It's not optional for us, it's essential to us. We are through and through social beings. How we learn is socially. How we discover and invent and create is socially done. How we live, we learn technologies, we develop them socially. We have this thing called culture that's this aggregation of social learning where we've piled upon. We're like no other animal in this regard in our sociality, and it's essential to our being. Theologically, loving each other, being good neighbors, is core to Christian ethics and morality. We certainly should be suspect of any technology that is going to undercut or undermine our kind of sociality. This is a hard judgment call. I was reminded when this was brought to my attention of a really great little book that has kind of become an anthropological classic called The Riddle of Amish Culture by Donald Craybill. And in this book, Craybill discusses Old Order Amish. They're sort of one of the more traditional versions of Amish society in the United States. And in the book, as I recall, he argues, his thesis is, the Amish rejection of technology isn't a rejection of every and all technology per se, but is a great hesitant suspicion toward technology that they perceive will undercut their social fabric, that will start destroying their, not only their sort of feel-good relationships with each other, but even their dependence upon each other. And so, and in that I see some great wisdom, that if being sort of tightly knit together as a people is important to you, if your relationships in your family or your town or your church or whatever is your sort of social group, if that is really important, and we often hear that it is, at the end of your life, you don't think, I wish I would have worked more. It's, I wish I would have spent more time with the people that I love. If those relationships are as important as all of that, why would we introduce into our lives technologies that actually distance us from those people? And of course, I said it's difficult because sometimes these technologies are sold to us for their promise of enhancing our relationships. Telephones, when they're originally invented, right, help us to reach out and touch someone. The idea was telephone you could connect to, you could talk to, you could hear the voice of a beloved person who is far away, and that somehow keeps you connected to them. But notice that it also helps then give you permission or license to move away from the people that you loved because you can always call them instead. It becomes a substitute for the real thing, even though it's promised to be a way to connect with people when you can't help but be away. But suddenly it's an excuse or permission to be away. And cell phones, of course, just take this to the next degree. And so does sort of video conferencing. Video conferencing, of course, got very big during COVID when we were separated from each other by legal mandates, by policies and directives from our government say, no, you can't gather to people. Well, at least we've got video conferencing and video technologies to keep us connected with each other. But once those restrictions ended, we stayed distanced from each other, didn't we? And now we say, oh, it's even better because I can be connected with lots of people who are further away. But are we thinning those relationships instead of a smaller number of really deep relationships that we interact with, that we engage with on a regular basis? We've thinned them out. We've all seen those groups of teenagers who are all together on their cell phones, not interacting with each other, but interacting with people who aren't even there, or scrolling through social media or whatever it is. The technology is actually separating them from each other, not bringing them together, which is what it promised to do. So a question we should ask ourselves before we welcome into new technologies into our lives, before we invest in them, before we say, no, okay, I'm good with it, is it going to undercut or erode the fabric of our relational networks? Is it going to bring us closer to people and help us to love them better? Or is it going to give us yet another reason to step back and keep people at arm's length? Those are things we ought to be asking ourselves as well when it comes to new technologies. Let's try to be tech prudent. Think about what technologies are going to do to us, what the downstream consequences might be. I'm not necessarily advocating for a no technology or a Luddite kind of, or even Amish kind of lifestyle, but for us to be more tech prudent, to take a beat before we buy the latest and greatest new thing and say, what's this going to do to my life? What's this going to do to my relationships? Is this something that I really want and that I'm willing to give my money to other people so that my relationships might be threatened by it? Is something we really ought to consider. Okay, so let's be tech prudent out there. Thanks for joining me again. As always, leave comments, suggestions for other videos or conversations you'd like me to have, topics you'd like me to discuss. And see you next time. Bye for now.